All right, we're here to talk about Malignant. I've got some notes. I don't know if I'm going to get through all of them. This is a weird movie. Um, the short pitch, I would say, is imagine V for Vendetta, but a supernatural horror movie that morphs into a psychological thriller that's not quite as good. Actually, I would say that's not nearly as good. And that's kind of what this movie is. This movie's really weird. Parts of it are definitely bad. Parts of it might be good. And a lot of it is kind of interesting, I think. Certainly unique. I don't know how to feel about this movie. Beginning, I thought it was bad. And I was like, well, at least this made me rewatch The Ring, because that was good. And in the middle, I was just like, okay, it's boring. It's not terrible, but there's just like a lot of tropes and stuff. And then the last half, maybe, it's like, is this good? I don't know. I can't tell. I'm interested. So that's where I'm at. I don't know. If somebody came over right now and they were like, hey, I want to watch Malignant, I'd be like, okay, I can watch that again, I think. Let me get into my notes. So we start off with this, like, 30 years ago type scene. And I wrote B movie, the movie. And I don't mean B movie with Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, like, a schlocky B movie. Because so much of it seemed like it was so intentionally pretending to be a cheap B movie. I don't really know how to explain that, but there's just like the line delivery and the dialogue and the overacting and how there's no subtlety at all and things are just delivered, and it was really weird. And then we skip forward to present day, which I hate when movies do that. Just say the year. And I kind of thought for a while that we were just leaving that mostly aside, and I was like, okay, so that was like, I don't know, I guess a weirdly intentional parody of like a B movie, and now we're getting into the main movie. But then there was stuff in the main movie too that was kind of like that, but not as much like that. So I don't know if that was intentional or not. It's really weird. It's really weird. I'm gonna skip a lot of my notes. Skipping. Okay, so one thing that kept becoming an issue for me is this is one of those movies where it's hard to tell if the noises that you are hearing are also being heard by the characters or if that's part of the soundtrack. And I really, really dislike it when movies do this because it seems lazy and it makes your story less effective. If I don't know what your character is experiencing, then I don't know what I'm supposed to be experiencing. And then I'm thinking about that and being confused more than paying attention to your story. So I really dislike it when movies do that, and this movie does it multiple times. Later on, I wrote down the music needs to chill, because there would just be some times where the music would get so intense and like, even when nothing was happening. Very strange music choices in this. It's weird. I'm a musician. I'm a music teacher. I have a music channel. I usually don't pick up that much on music in movies. I always hear other movie reviewers talk about, oh, the music in this will play. I'm like, that's just not something I pick up on in movies most of the time, which is kind of weird. But whatever. It is what it is. But this was just like very in-your-face music. Which again, it's like, are they intentionally being schlocky, or is it just bad? I don't know. I don't know. I wrote down that there are some interesting camera angles. I don't know how much of it was actual set work and how much of it was CG, but there's neat, interesting shots where we see characters like running through a house or whatever, and we see it from above, which is just not a way that I normally see characters running through it. You know, you think of any horror movie, slasher movie, whatever, where characters are chasing each other through a house, you either see it from one's perspective or the other's perspective or from the side. You don't normally see it from a bird's eye view inside a house, and that was interesting. I liked that. I don't think that would have made or broke. That doesn't sound. I don't think that can make or break a movie, but it was like an interesting stylistic directorial choice. At one point, they start going into the Seattle underground and how like current Seattle is built on top of old Seattle, and I literally thought to myself, "Wow, I really want to look that up right now to see if that's true or not." More so than I want to keep watching this movie, and it took all my self-control to not pick up my phone and start researching to see whether or not that's a real thing. Apparently, at least to some extent, it is. It reminded me a whole lot of New York in Futurama, how it's just built on top of the old one. But I'm just like, if you're going to introduce something that interesting, your movie has to be more interesting. And at that point in the movie, it wasn't. Because at that point in the movie, it just seemed like it was just ticking boxes of what a horror movie is supposed to be. We hadn't gotten to the stuff that might be good yet. One point I just wrote, "Turn the lights on, idiot," because many different characters and many different scenes are afraid of something coming from a dark place, and they forget how lights work and just don't turn the lights on. At one point I wrote, "This is a series of spooky shots unrelated to the plot." There are so many times, and I get that horror movies do this sometimes, but this happens a lot in this movie, where like the camera is like making you think that something's about to happen, especially with the music. The suspense builds and builds and bubble, and then just like it just cuts to another scene. I'm like, I'd rather have that than stupid bird jump scares that I talk about all the time, or you know, where it's just like an animal or whatever. And there is one stupid jump scare like that in this movie. I didn't write it down. There was one. I'm okay with one. But it's just weird. Because then you're telling me not to trust the camera. When the camera and the music is setting something up, and then you don't pay it off, but you also don't subvert it, you just go to something else, then that just teaches me to not care when I see that start to happen again. This is a weird movie. So then, I guess, I don't know. I don't think I've said anything too spoilery yet. I'm going to get into some spoilers here. So, obviously my feelings on this are confused. So if you're going to peace out now, that's the best I can give, is that I'm very confused on how I feel about this movie. If you've got HBO Max, check it out. I would say give it a little over an hour. And then once things start happening, if you're not into it, then bail out. But if you're like, wait a minute, this might be something, then finish it off. But moving on, we're going to have some spoilers. So this was before anything was really revealed, but you can just tell. It's one of those things where they're not trying to hide it necessarily, but they're not making it overly obvious. But Gabriel, as we see more and more of him, he's backwards. And that becomes why that becomes revealed later, and right. But like, I think I first noticed it definitively when the detective was chasing him around town, whatever, into the underground. And I'm like, this is gonna be a big thing later, that he's backwards. And so like, I don't want to be like, I figured it out, but like, I kind of started to piece things together. And that's kind of how the movie went. And I'm okay with that. I'm not the kind of person that's like, oh, I was able to figure out, so it was too easy. It should have blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, they left clues. I figured it out. Good for me. Yay. I'm fine with it. I feel like I don't do that a whole lot. So maybe this movie was a little bit more obvious than the standard. Even at the beginning, I skipped these notes, but like, they're talking about this patient before it's revealed that it's a child. And just like, with how the stuff was going and how schlocky it was, and how I was just like, it's going to be revealed that this is a kid, right? And then we see the little kid panda socks on him. And I'm like, yep, it's a kid. And then we see something weird. So I was like, okay, so it's not a normal kid, but I was still right. So there's just kind of, it sets stuff up for you to figure out. I think it's fine. I don't know why I talked so long about that point. But, yeah, I did start to notice that he was backwards, which meant that I was able to figure stuff out later on. I guess I'm in spoiler territory. I didn't know exactly how it was going to go down, but literally I had in my head, I was like, it's going to be like that dude from the first Harry Potter movie. Where there's just going to be, between Gabriel moving backwards and, what's her name? Madison, having essentially sleep paralysis, and the fact that her head was always bleeding when it happened, I was just like, there's going to be a Voldemort there on the back. I didn't think it was literally going to be that. I was closer than I thought. But yeah, they set it up. At one point I wrote, scenes don't end. It just cuts to another scene. I think that happened again multiple times where something happens and you're like, okay, I want to see where this goes. I want to see the resolution to this. And it just doesn't. And it cuts to somewhere else. I do think most of those we see the resolution later, so I don't think it's a big problem, but it's just something that I noticed. It goes back to that whole idea of the camera sets things up and then the music sets things up, and then it's just like the writing sets things up, and they're not always paid off, and they're certainly not always paid off right away. It's just weird. I already talked about how the music needs to chill. Okay, so then we're fully into this, and at this point, it's not a horror movie anymore. Right? This isn't a ghost. This isn't a demon. This is now a psychological thriller, and it's this not conjoined twin, but whatever I want to say Tamatoa, but that's the crab from Moana. But whatever this parasitic twin situation is, and it's like they try so hard to make it seem like a plausible, realistic thing that could happen. But then they give Gabriel superpowers. He can talk through the radio. He can control electronic devices. He's got crazy martial arts skills, super strength, and can climb on walls. So I'm like, if you're gonna go all the way in on that stuff, just make it a demon or something. Why go this weird twin route? And I guess it's to be original, because I know there have been other movies that kind of deal with stuff like that. I don't think they deal with it like it. But, that's a thing that I know from movies, not from real life. But I do think it's kind of original to do it in this context. So maybe that was why they did it this way, was to be original. But it just seems weird, on one hand, to try and have realistic explanations for what's happening, and then on the other hand, just be like, yeah, but also he's like a supervillain that has all sorts of powers. I think it would have been... I think the ending is going to be divisive. I think I enjoyed the ending. I don't think it was good. And by the ending, I mean the last 45 minutes or so. I don't think it was good, but I think I kind of enjoyed it. I definitely could have enjoyed it more, but I think some people are just going to check out. Basically, once it stops being a horror movie, and I've already seen someone else say it just turns into an action movie that's not interested in scaring you at all, which is fair. But I forgot where I was going with this thought. I think it would have been more interesting if they had kept him as a realistic being, and I know that that's not really how that stuff would work. But I mean, if they couldn't just have him just climbing on walls. And maybe he wasn't literally climbing on walls. Maybe he's like, pushing up against it with a super. But like, he's clearly stronger than she is, which shouldn't be the case. He's clearly got advanced abilities that he can just, again, like V for Vendetta, just take out a room full of people with guns with one knife, not even several like V has. But I think if it had basically just been a guy, and the weirdest part was that it was, two personalities sharing a body, I think that would have been more interesting. Because then you're rooting for the good guys to take out the bad guy, but because the bad guy is also Madison and you're rooting for Madison, there's conflict there. But the way that it's presented, I never thought Gabriel was in any danger, because he was like shot multiple times, unless that cop is just a really bad aim. But just like the skills that he possesses and what he's able to do, at no point did I think, oh, someone might get him, right? That was never in the cards for me. So I was never really concerned about other protagonists harming the main protagonist. I was kind of concerned what Gabriel was going to do with her in the end. But, they almost kind of play with the idea of, this cop who's kind of like a love interest, not really, but he might have to hurt this girl that he's, been helping. But it's like barely there, and that could have been a much bigger part and could have made me much more invested in how it was going if Gabriel had just been someone with normal abilities. Okay. So my next note, this is kind of what I was getting at with how I could have enjoyed it more. Every time we see Gabriel, at the beginning, we basically only just see shadows. And we don't even really see much of a form. Then eventually we see his face, right? And then as we see more and more of him, at first I thought it was just like a shadow demon type thing, because that's what it looked like. But as we see more and more of him, it's clear that it's an actual person, right? But we never see the back of Gabriel's head because of the reveal that comes later. And I just bought that, he just brushes the hair back and then it covers her face, right? But after the reveal happens, they don't do that. They keep her face visible, which is very off-putting. It's very strange. It doesn't look good. It doesn't add anything. And it's inconsistent. And the only reason that it changes, there's no plot reason for it to change. The only reason it changes is because we, the audience, now know what's happening. So they don't have to hide it from us anymore. But just go ahead and cover her face up with your hair, Gabriel. I don't get why they kept her face visible. I think maybe it was to make it more obvious that everything he was doing was backwards, but I think it looked better when the front part of the face looked like the back, right? And then it was more interesting to kind of question, is he moving backwards? Yeah, he's moving backwards. Everything he's doing is backwards. But it's like your brain is struggling with that, whereas at the end, it's like hits you over the head with it that everything's backwards. And so it's just weird. It just looks weird. And that a face on the other side looks weird. It doesn't add anything, I don't think. Not for me, at least. So I wish they just would have not had her face visible the whole time. Especially since it's not doing anything. She's still thinks she's in the jail cell. She's not talking to anybody. She's not reacting to anything. There's no purpose for it to be there. It looks like... Because apparently all the backward stuff was real. It's not CGI. That's what I read on IMDb. It's some dancer that's actually doing everything for real, which I think is awesome. That was, I think, the coolest part of this movie was seeing all that stuff done backwards. And I assumed, just based on how good it looked, that it was real. And then I read that it was real, so I believe that it's real. And it seems like they just put a cheap Party City mask version of this other actress's face just over the back of her head, because it just doesn't do anything. It just stays there and it doesn't move and it looks like a mask. So I wish that had been covered up. I think it would have looked way cooler. Seeing Gabriel do all this stuff without the distraction of Madison's face there. Okay, so then I wrote, can a hospital / adoption agency just not tell families stuff like that? So, Madison was adopted as a child. It's like not a baby. I forget how old they said she was. 12 maybe? But like, the hospital obviously knew about Gabriel and his abilities, and they didn't disclose that, which I can buy not disclosing the abilities because no one's going to believe you, right? That's going to seem weird. That's a whole different set of paperwork you got to worry about. But like, you would still tell the family about the twin, right? And about the procedure, because the doctor even says that like, we removed what we could and we suppressed the rest, which implies that they understood that at some point it had a chance of becoming unsuppressed. I'm like, can adoptions agencies just like know about stuff like, by the way, they had a conjoined twin that was now, like, even in a real world setting, you'd have to tell the family that, right? You can't just not tell them that. That seems illegal. Oh, goodness. Then I wrote, convenient coma, because the mother, who has been in a coma, just happens to wake up right when it's relevant to the plot. Again, she didn't need to be in a coma. That didn't serve any function for the plot. So it's weirder that she was and then just happens to wake up. If she had just been resting in the hospital the whole time, that would make perfect sense and that wouldn't be weird, but they had to make it weird. Okay, so then we're coming up on the end, and it's one of those things that, like, the stuff was all there in place, and I had figured it out by this point, and I thought it was fairly clear at that point, but then they literally come out and have the sister say it, where Gabriel was using all of Madison's miscarriages to gain strength, and that's why she couldn't have a baby. And, like, up until that point, I'm like, okay, I get it, fine, whatever. But then, like, to blatantly come out and say that, I'm just like, why are you using miscarriages as a plot point? Real people have to deal with that, and I can't imagine how difficult that is. And I can't imagine going into a movie wanting to be entertained, seeing a character like that, and then finding out that, oh, well, it's just because this evil twin that was living inside. Like, I don't get why they would feel the need to be so blatant about that. Again, I can understand that concept being in there, but like, why do you feel the need to smack people over the head with it? That seems unnecessary. Then we get, the astral plane, Madison versus Gabriel. And she just says, I wrote it down, she says, now I can do all the mind control tricks you can. And I wrote, how? How can you just suddenly do that? Right? You clearly couldn't when you were a kid, or else you would have then. You didn't know about it all this time, so fine. But how is that something you just can suddenly do? And they try to explain it. She's like, remember, we use the same brain. But I'm like, but that's something that he worked up over time as a necessity because he didn't have anything else. So that's all that he had to go off of. And you can just do it now. Did not like that element of the ending. And then I kind of touched on this before. She's going to, because Gabriel like threw this bed across the room at the sister, and then after Madison is taken back over, she goes to pick it up, and the sister's like, "It's gonna be too heavy for you," and Madison's like, "It was always my body. If he could lift it, I can too." And then she struggles really hard to lift it, which is like, if he threw it, and it's the same body, you should have no problem. You should not be struggling. And if you're going to say that you can do everything he can, that means that you can climb on walls and crap. And you've got supernatural athletic ability and gymnastic skills. But no, we're not going to worry about any of that. We're just going to say this line that we don't, why is that line in there? Why does it, just have her lift the bed off. Don't have the sister comment on how heavy it's going to be. Don't have Madison say, oh, well, I can do everything. Because that just brings up more problems. Just have her move the bed off. Or if you're worried that the audience isn't going to believe that a girl can lift that bed by herself, then have someone else come in and help her lift it. Parts of this movie are definitely bad. Parts of it might be good. Some of it is certainly interesting. And I would be interested enough in watching it again, mainly just knowing that everything Gabriel does is backwards. Keeping an eye on that the whole time, I would be interested in watching those segments and then being on my phone for most of the rest of it. I'm going to stop there, because otherwise I'm just going to rant and ramble. So those are my thoughts on Malignant. You'd let me know what you think. That's everything that I have. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day. Hey everybody, Sam Tom here. Just wanted to let you know that I have 2 channels. If you're watching my music content, I also have a movie channel where I talk about movies and TV shows. If you're watching my movie content, I have a music channel where I do song covers, instrument demos, things like that. So feel free to check that out. Obviously, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that YouTube stuff. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.